from a spiritual perspective. I was just in Egypt at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and you might have heard a lot of news from the conference and read some articles. Although in India, the coverage was not that much as in the West, I would say. Interestingly, there were two main focuses at this climate conference. One focus was the national determined contributions, which is the targets which each country promises to deliver in terms of CO2 reduction. The umbrella is, the idea is to match the Paris Agreement to stay below 1.5 centigrade temperature rise. And therefore, the economies have to be climate neutral by 2050, which is quite a big target, an ambitious target. And the second, one of the second major topics at the conference was loss and damage. And that is very closely related also to just transition. That's what I'm talking a bit about today. We all know that climate change is happening already, and all around the world, hurricanes are increasing, seawater level is rising. I was last summer in Europe in the Alps, and I drove with a motorcycle through the mountains, and all the trees in the Alps are getting brown and dying. And yesterday I read a report from some forest department in America, in Oregon, and they say that 50% of the trees are in process of dying. So we can see the effects of climate change already everywhere. And the whole topic of loss and damage is that the rich Western world, which has caused climate change through its emission and through its industrialization over a long period of time, they're approximately responsible for 80% of the emissions which are causing climate change now. They are acknowledging that, and they are providing funds to the third world or to the developing world or to those countries which are affected mostly. And they also transfer technology to deal with this climate change. So that's all about loss and damage. And of course, that's including also the just transition process. So as you might know, the climate conference in Egypt was not that much of a success. There was a lot of debates and tactics, and I think there were 30,000 delegates, 3,000 people from the press, 100 head of states, hundreds of ministers and secretaries and whatnot, and a huge exhibition. And we from Brahma Kumaris, we have an environmental initiative, and we are participating since more than 10 years at all the climate conferences. So we had a stand and exhibition, and we had around 30 programs also. But the outcome was not so good, I would say. It was rather a bit like a failure, you can say. Almost the 1.5 degree goal was scrapped. There was a lot of movement behind the scenes, and some countries, they are on the brake. They don't want any binding agreement because their industry or their paradigm, their system, their economy is relying on fossil fuels and on the production, on the generation of fossil fuels. And on the other hand, you have countries which are suffering massively already. A lot of the island countries, for example, are suffering from climate change, and they want a very ambitious agreement. So in between this bandwidth, you have a lot of negotiations, a lot of talks, and a lot of pushing and diplomacy going on behind the scenes. And almost this 1.5 degree climate goal from Paris Agreement got scrapped, but then the EU came in and the European Union and said, okay, if you scrap this, we walk out. So they pressurized the Egyptian presidency to raise their own ambition and bring the conference back on track. So they kept it. However, very few countries have come up with new NDCs, National Determined Contribution. So they all say, okay, we want to go for 1.5 degree temperature rise. But they don't come up with the goals, how to achieve it. And Germany, for example, has promised to reduce, the EU has promised to reduce its carbon emission within a certain time frame. And it's Germany, for example, is not achieving those targets right now. One of the reasons is the Ukraine war between Russia and Ukraine. So they are running the old coal-based power stations longer than they were expecting because we have no gas from Russia. There's a shortage of energy and fuel. So we have to run the old plants, which were supposed to go out of action now. So in Germany, for example, they say we have 7 years time in our carbon budget. If we go on as we are going on right now for the next 6-7 years, then all the CO2 budget, which would be remaining to stay below 1.5 degree, would have gone into the atmosphere. And that's pretty tough. It would mean within a very short time, we would have to dramatically reduce our carbon emissions. And it seems none of the major powers are really prepared to that. So thanks to a big intervention of some countries, this 1.5 degree was kept alive, but the national determined contributions, the countries, the big players didn't really come up with new reduction promises really to match that. So that is one problem. The other issue was loss and damage. And you might have read or heard that there has been agreement. They agreed to the principle of loss and damage, and that's a big issue. It means basically that the first world, the developing nations, they acknowledge that they are responsible for majority of the contribution and climate change, and they acknowledge that they agree to compensate the third world or those countries which suffer mostly by climate change with financial contributions. So this was a big breakthrough and everybody was quite happy. However, we have to understand that the same thing was already agreed 5-8 years ago and nothing came out. And this time they agreed to put up a commission or a council which looks into it and then at the next conference comes up with concrete steps. So it's sort of like, some promise that they will put up a committee which then will look into the thing and come up with some suggestions. So it's also not the real deal. And already they promised 5 years ago or 6 years ago, I think in Paris, to provide $100 billion for climate compensation, which then has not been paid. And part of this loss and damage is the whole topic of just transition. So I would like to explain a little bit. So I gave you a bit of an overview of the what happened in Sharm el-Sheikh, and the insiders, they all believed that it was a bit of a lost case, and another chance has been missed to sort of come up with the action which is really required to tackle the climate change. So now coming to the topic of just transition. So we all know if we change our economy and initiate that paradigm shift to deal with climate change, there have to be a lot of structural changes. And this will have massive impacts on regions, on areas, and on groups. So, for example, if you phase out coal-based power plants, you also phase out coal mining. And suddenly regions which are living from coal mining, where since maybe 100 years coal mining, suddenly they will be out of job because you close down the mines. So the just transition topic is a lot about protecting workers and in return create quality jobs. So when this impact hits these regions or areas or group, then you can provide alternatives. So this transition has to be fair. It should not leave anyone behind. And it implies the implementation of policies and frameworks that a social dialogue can happen between all the groups which are involved. So that's the topic of just transition. And they talk a lot about also linking all players together, diverse actors which are involved, like national, regional governments, workers, companies, investors, NGOs, etc., etc. So shifting, getting away from fossil fuels is not easy. It's a very disruptive process because for 150 years since the Industrial Revolution, we are hooked on fossil fuels. Our economy is running on that. And it is a very delicate process where you need a lot of feeling in the fingertips to handle that just. Unfortunately, quite often, again, this depends a lot on availability of funds, the just transition. So the third world is also asking the West, the rich West, for this money for just transition. In Germany, for example, we have a lot of, we had a lot of the Ruhr Valley, where a lot of coal mining was going on. And in that coal mining, hundreds of mines, we produced brown coal, which is very dirty, not the black coal. Oh, no, I think it's black coal, sorry. But it became, we had started to phase out all the power stations in Germany, the coal-based power stations, so there was no more need. And the coal from other regions was much, much cheaper because they had to go very deep down and so on. So they closed all the mines gradually. And then they worked out so there were hundreds of thousands of people working there in that area. So what they did is they made a master plan and slowly, slowly created other jobs and transferred these people into other areas. So they made a social adaptive plan. But you need money for that. Again, here, it's a question of funding. And rightly, the third world says that the rich West is responsible for climate change because it's their industrialization over the last 100 years, which has caused the climate change. And now the third world is suffering. So naturally, they say, please give us money, give us technology, and give us guidance. So this is also about this just transition, a whole just transition topic. And for India, for example, this is a huge task. It would mean slowly phasing out coal power, which is not happening right now. India is planning or is in process of building coal-based power stations. One would have to close coal mines. One would have to remove fossil subsidies. Still, interestingly, fossil fuels are the most highly subsidized energy in the world, much more than renewables, much, much, much more. We have to shut down polluting power stations, and we have to install solar and wind at a very high speed and a large scale. This is happening to some extent in India, that there is a sort of, the government is very ambitious in India to install renewable energies, but they already declared here that it won't be enough to deal with the increased demand of power in India over the next coming years. So they also built new coal-based power stations. So, so these are the dilemmas which are all involved in creating this transition, shifting towards a zero carbon economy and a zero carbon society. It's a very complex crisis. So at the moment, what's going on actually is a very interesting situation we are in, because over the last years, you all noticed the world is in one crisis after the other. First, we had the Corona crisis, which, created lockdowns and a lot of hardship for people. Many people died. They left us. So it was very, and the world came almost to a standstill. Interestingly, the reduction in carbon emissions was not that strong in Corona lockdown, because people still had to cook. They still used electricity. So little reduction was there, but not too much. But one of the effects of Corona was that there was you can say there was an economic recession as an after effect of Corona crisis, because consumerism luckily reduced. People didn't go so much shopping. And also the supply chain got disrupted, which is still happening right now. Many things you're not getting, many products you're not getting. And there is a shortage of many things in the world. And sometimes you have to wait for months on certain products, especially the industry is facing that. Car manufacturers, chip manufacturing, construction sites, they all face unavailability of certain components because supply chain has been disrupted. And then thirdly, the other crisis which is looming behind that is the climate change crisis. Our climate is changing now rapidly. And because of because of Corona, because of recession, there is not necessarily money and the willpower there to tackle the climate change right now. I mean, the money was before Corona, at least a lot of money was there and some willpower was there. Now there is a certain mood that people say, okay, let's first get out of this Corona, then let's get out of this recession. Let's get the economy back on track. And then we can tackle climate change, which is not the only problem. There is also the loss of biodiversity. You might know that right now there is a conference in Montreal, COP15 it's called. It's dealing with the biodiversity, loss of biodiversity. And since 1980, in Europe, in Germany, 50% of all the insects have disappeared. Just like that, poof. And some places, 80% of the insects have disappeared, which is dramatic. And we need the insects, Without insects, our food chain will collapse, And they just disappear because of pesticides. And so there's this conference going on in Montreal, but it also not sure if something will come out because so many different interests, And of course, the big fertilizer companies and pesticides manufacturers, they have their lobby groups at these conferences, and they say, yeah. And they same at the climate conference, there were 2,000 people from the oil companies and fossil fuel just lobbying that not an agreement, a tough agreement will be signed. So you see this diversity of interests, and that is one of the problems, that there's no unity in all that. So we have all these crises looming there, and the world is in a really big crisis. And now I come to the spiritual perspective, last part of my talk, which is, in my opinion, the most important, because you already heard that these crises are fundamental and they're not easily solved. They're all interwoven. They're very, very complex, and you would need a global effort, unprecedented global effort. And at the moment, on top of all the problems, we have the war in Ukraine and between Ukraine and Russia. And you see massive resources being diverted, which should be used for climate protection, biodiversity, for green technology. They're being diverted into war efforts and also into the sanctions which are happening, and the sanctions are causing another ripple effect, less money, less economy, so social unrest and so on. So governments are less willing to invest into costly transition towards a clean economy. But on the other side, it's a very difficult situation because we already are in the midst of climate change. And if we don't stop it, we sort of destroy the foundation of life, human life on this planet. So it's a dilemma. So we can understand that a solution has to come from another corner, you know, from another idea or mindset. And that brings us to the spiritual perspective, how to tackle these problems and how to position yourself, how to have sanity in all these problems, seeing them. I'm going since 15 years to climate change conferences, and now there's a new disease called climate anxiety. The psychiatrists, they came up with it. They say more and more youngsters, they get mad, especially in the West, because they see no future. They're very frustrated. You know, that is Friday for Futures and the last generation. They make all sorts of protests and this and that. And they said, we have no future, what to do? So, and they're depressed and they have mental problems because they don't see a future and they see only that the world is being destroyed. And they said, what can we do? Where's our future? Where's our life? So how to tackle that, how to deal with that, how to stay powerful, positive, and happy in the midst of all this crisis scenario. First of all, crisis is always a chance for change. Crisis always brings out the best in us humans, and we understand that we have to change now, otherwise we're in very deep trouble. So crisis is also like a motivator and an activator, you can say. And this crisis here is a big motivator and a big activator because it's so fundamental and it's so huge. So the spiritual perspective is twofold. You know, I'm from the Brahma Kumaris. We're a spiritual organization. Our headquarters is in Mount Abu. I'm talking to you from Mount Abu. And we meditate regular and we have a spiritual lifestyle. And so we have a twofold approach. One is we try to keep our mind healthy, or you can say balanced. And the second is we try to have beneficial actions. It means good karma. The problems which we are facing right now is a lot of karma from the past. It's climate change, pollution from the past, which is coming back. It's wars from the past, which come back to us. So whatever we do in the past, it's not gone. It is there. That is the law of karma. So we have to deal with these aspects in order to understand. We have to understand these aspects in order to deal and find a right remedy. So one is to keep the mind healthy. And that means your mind should be centered in values and ethics. Very, very, very important. We should be loving, we should be compassionate, and we should be peaceful. You know, very simple. If you love yourself and you love others, you will treat them nicely. And if you love nature, you will treat nature nicely because you love it. So you will take care. You will protect it. So love is very central. And if we connect to inner love, to inner peace, and if we become compassionate and share that with others, it will have a fundamental impact in our happiness, in our state of mind. We build up inner resilience, inner strength, and it changes our action. That's the most important. So the change of action has to come from a change of mindset. And meditation, as we all know, is a very powerful tool. Every day, 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening, and you charge up and you rest peaceful, and you very, very easily go through all the challenges of the day. And it slowly changes also your action. So, having said this about the healthy mind, then what is the next is beneficial action. So once the mind is healthy, it is peaceful, loving, compassionate, it changes my action. What does it mean? Look into your lifestyle. How do I live? Do I have a renewable energy system? What can I do on a personal level? Check your carbon footprint. Check your diet. Am I vegetarian or am I vegan? We all know that one of the biggest polluters is meat-based diet. Meat production is horrible. A carbon emitter, and many studies in the world, they agree that within the next 10 years, world population has to go vegetarian, otherwise no chance to match the 1.5 centigrades. So I hope India is the country of saints, and holy people, and I hope you're all vegetarian or considering it to go vegetarian, because for climate protection, vegetarian or even better, vegan is a must, you know. Then look into your personal things. What are you doing? Do I have renewables? Do I share my car with others? And so on and so on. And the Brahma Kumaris has created a environmental initiative 15 years ago when we first went to Copenhagen for the climate conference. And we have initiated certain projects there. One is, for example, a plastic-free lifestyle. So we try to avoid plastic as much as possible. You know, plastic is such a disaster, especially also in India. And so we try to avoid, and I try to use cloth bags, for example, you know. And if I buy something, or I avoid that it gets packed in plastic. So that much. And I try to carry my own bag and not take from some shop a plastic bag and so on. This is one thing. You can also promote it in your institution and get free of one-time plastic dishes and things and then throw them away. Try to go to environmental friendly products which are available already. We also created a carbon offset for our travel. So we people within the Brahma Kumaris, they can donate money, and that money we will use for tree plantation. Then we have also a tree plantation program. It's called Kalptaru, and we have planted millions of trees all over India. And it's online, and there's an app, and it's very high tech. But each click is one tree which you plant. So that is working quite nicely. We have also created an initiative called Yogis for Future, in which we inspire people to meditate. This Yogis for Future is a platform with meditation commentaries for the self, for the nature, for the environment, for the inner peace, for relations to others, against anxiety and so on. This is 6 to 8 minutes meditation, very calm, very neutral. It's free, and you can click in the morning with nice music, and you have 10 minutes, 5 minutes meditation, and you're relaxed in the day. We also promote renewable energies for all, for everybody. And Brahma Kumaris is a recognized research center with the Department of Science and Technology for renewable energies. And we are active since 25 years in the field of renewable energies. And Brahma Kumaris is probably the biggest institutional user of renewables in India. We have more than 500 solar systems in India. We have just initiated a 1 megawatt solar thermal power station that was a research project between the German and the Indian government. And we run in many of our ashrams, we run them with photovoltaic systems or with solar hot water systems or solar cooking systems. And we also promote solar lantern and solar cooking box. So then we do a lot of activities in terms of awareness campaigns. We invite people to come to Mount Abu for our different programs and workshops and seminars. And in the center, we make these environmental campaigns. And in general, we try to inspire people to meditate, change their mindset, and to understand that the crisis in the world, which we're seeing outside there, is a reflection of a crisis on the inside. And if we all join hands as a global community and we initiate this inner transformation, we connect to our values and ethics, which are all the time there, and we make them strong to meditation, it changes our action. And then action will become beneficial. Then we change the technology, and then we can initiate also that necessary paradigm shift. And the good news is Brahma Kumaris has the understanding that we are in a transition time right now, and the world is in a period of big change from lifestyle, technology, and mindset, which is not sustainable, to a mindset and technology and lifestyle, which is sustainable. And in India, in the old spiritual context, it is said we're right now in the Kali Yuga, and we believe we are transiting in the transition process towards the next Satyuga. And what we're seeing right now is the death of the one and the birth of the other. And that's why we have all these tensions, this commotion, and the future doesn't right now at the moment look quite clear. But from our understanding, nothing to worry, nothing to fear. Everything will be all right. Everything will be good. And the good news is that humans have an incredible potential for change of our own action, but we can also change the atmosphere around us through meditation, the vibrations. And as quantum physics tell us, or science tells us, the physicist tells us, everything around us is vibration, it's energy. And the mind is directly connected to quantum field. We sometimes can influence the outcome of experiments also through our mind. So this crisis we're seeing right now brings up in us our full creative potential. And if we all collectively wake up, we can become change makers, and we all can create a beautiful world in front of us. So thank you very much.